We've all been there, right? You tell yourself, okay, just going to quickly check my emails, and then bam, suddenly you're like 3 cat videos deep and wondering where the last hour went.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
like our brains are wired to get hooked on these little dopamine hits.
It's true, and Atomic Habits really gets into that. It's fascinating how this book takes something we often see as rigid, our habits, and shows how these tiny, almost invisible adjustments can have this ripple effect on our lives.
Exactly. And I think that's why it's resonated with so many people, right? It's not about these huge, overwhelming makeovers. It's about, like you said, those small tweaks.
Small tweaks, consistent action, big results.
Exactly. And since you're all about making the most of your time and energy, we're diving into the core of Atomic Habits to give you those practical takeaways you can apply right away.
Love it. And I think a great place to start is with how the book reframes how we think about habits in the first place.
Okay, yeah, because I think a lot of times we just see them as, like, things we do.
Right.
But it's more nuanced than that.
It is. The book emphasizes that habits are more like these automatic loops constantly running in the background of our brains.
Ooh, okay, I like that. Automatic loops. So it's not so much about conscious choice all the time. It's more like these pre-programmed responses.
Exactly. And the book breaks down this habit loop into 4 stages. Cue, craving, response, reward.
Okay, I've heard of this loop before, but let's break it down. So let's say, for example, you walk into your kitchen and you see that bowl of fruit on the counter.
Okay, so that's the cue right there. Seeing that fruit, it triggers something in your brain, maybe even trying to eat healthier, right?
Right.
So that spark of, ooh, a healthy snack, that's the craving kicking in.
Got it. So the cue triggers the craving. Then what?
Well, let's say you grab an apple. That's the response to that craving and the reward. Well, aside from that delicious crunch, it's that feeling of, hey, I'm taking care of myself that kind of reinforces the habit.
Right, so it's like that little internal high five you give yourself, that sense of satisfaction that
Yeah.
makes you want to repeat the behavior.
Exactly. And what's so powerful about understanding this loop is that you realize it's not about willpower, it's about strategy. Once you see the mechanics, you can start tweaking them.
Okay, so we've got this habit loop running in the background, kind of like our brain's autopilot, right?
Exactly.
But how do we hack the system? How do we actually rewire those loops to work for us, not against us?
Well, that's where the real meat of Atomic Habits comes in, those practical strategies.
Yeah, because we need more than just theory, right?
Absolutely. We need actionable tools. And one of my favorites that the book lays out is the 2-minute rule.
Okay, 2-minute rule, that does ring a bell, but remind me how it works again.
So it's all about making starting a new habit as ridiculously easy as possible, like almost embarrassingly easy.
Okay, I like where this is going. I think I'm starting to remember.
The book puts it this way. When you start a new habit, it should take less than 2 minutes to do.
Okay, so like instead of saying I'm going to write a novel, it's I'm going to open my laptop and write 1 sentence.
Exactly. Or instead of meditate for 20 minutes, it's just sit down and close my eyes for 1 minute.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
It's about taking that big, daunting goal and breaking it down to the smallest possible step.
Yeah, because sometimes even just getting started feels impossible, right? Especially when your motivation is low.
Absolutely, but when you make that initial step tiny, you overcome that resistance, that feeling of, ugh, this is going to be hard.
It's like tricking your brain into getting started, and I can see how in those moments when you're just not feeling it, having that ridiculously easy starting point could make all the difference.
Exactly. And the cool thing is, often once you've taken that first step, you're much more likely to keep going, right?
Right. It's like you get the ball rolling.
Exactly. Momentum builds on itself.
I love that. Okay, so we've got the 2-minute rule in our back pocket. What other tricks does Atomic Habits have up its sleeve?
Well, this next one builds on that idea of momentum. It's called habit stacking.
Okay, habit stacking. Tell me more.
So it's all about leveraging your existing habits, the things you already do consistently, as triggers for new habits you want to build.
Ooh, okay, I'm intrigued.
So the book gives this example. After I pour my morning coffee, I will meditate for 1 minute. You're already doing the coffee thing every day, right?
Right, like clockwork.
So it becomes this natural cue, this trigger for the new habit.
That's so smart. It's like you're not trying to reinvent the wheel, you're just adding a new spoke.
Exactly.
Instead of overhauling your entire routine, you're just finding those little openings, those existing patterns,
Yeah.
and kind of weaving in something new.
Exactly. And the book even suggests, I love this, it suggests actually brainstorming a list of your current habits, like everything from brushing your teeth to checking your phone, to identify those potential triggers for new habits you want to build.
It's like becoming a detective of your own habits.
I love that because it's true. It's about paying attention to those existing patterns and then saying, okay, how can I leverage these to my advantage?
Okay, so we've got the 2-minute rule. We've got habit stacking. What else?
All right, this next one is all about the power of our environment. It's called environment design.
Oh, environment design. Okay, see this one I get because I am so susceptible to this.
How so?
Like if I leave a pan of cookies on the counter, I have zero willpower, it's over. It's like they're calling my name.
Right, and that's exactly what environment design gets at. Our surroundings are constantly sending us cues, whether we're aware of it or not.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
So the book argues that making the cues for good habits obvious and the cues for bad habits invisible can, like, significantly impact our behavior.
Okay, so in the cookie scenario,
Sure.
instead of relying solely on willpower to resist, it's like maybe don't buy them in the first place or at least keep them out of sight, right?
Exactly. Out of sight, out of mind.
It's so true.
Or let's say you want to read more. Instead of having your phone on your bedside table, try putting a book there instead.
It's about making the desired behavior the easiest, most appealing option.
Precisely.
I like it. Okay, so we've covered the 2-minute rule, habit stacking, environment design, all about making it easier to start and stick with good habits.
Hmm.
What else can we do to kind of stack the deck in our favor?
Well, this next one taps into our brain's reward system, that feeling of, ooh, that felt good. I want to do that again.
Yes, because that's what keeps us coming back for more, right?
But absolutely. We're far more likely to repeat behaviors that feel good. So it's about making those positive habits satisfying.
Okay, so we're talking about the short-term rewards here because let's face it, those long-term rewards, while amazing, can feel kind of abstract in the moment.
Totally. And the book gives this great example of a couple that wanted to save for a trip to Europe.
Oh.
And so each time they skipped a restaurant meal, which for them was a big thing to give up, they would take that money they would spent and physically transfer it into their trip to Europe fund.
Yeah.
And the act of moving that money, even though it was just like a small action, became its own mini reward.
I know, I love that. So it's like a visual reminder of their progress too.
Right. Exactly. It's like gamifying your goals a little bit. And I bet over time, seeing that trip to Europe fund grow became its own reward, further fueling their motivation.
That's brilliant. Okay, so we've talked about strategies for building better habits, but what about breaking those pesky bad ones? Atomic Habits must have some insights for that too, right?
Absolutely, it does. And it approaches breaking bad habits using those same principles, just in reverse.
Okay, so kind of like the flip side of the coin.
Exactly. So remember how we talked about making good habits obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying?
Right.
Well, to break a bad habit, you want to make it invisible, unattractive, difficult, and unsatisfying.
Okay, I like it. So let's break those down, starting with make it invisible. That one seems pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, it's all about reducing exposure, removing those environmental cues that trigger the bad habit in the first place.
So like if, say, mindless scrolling is your vice, deleting those social media apps from your phone could be a good first step.
Exactly. Out of sight, out of mind, right?
Yep, sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective.
Right. And then there's make it unsatisfying, increase the immediate pain or cost of that bad habit.
Okay, so thinking back to that habit contract example, it could be something like, I don't know, having to donate to a cause you don't support each time you slip up.
Exactly. Or even something as simple as having to do 10 push-ups every time you catch yourself indulging in the bad habit. The key is to make that immediate consequence something you genuinely want to avoid.
Right, gotta up the ante a little bit.
Exactly. And finally, there's make it difficult. Increase the friction, the number of steps it takes to actually engage in that bad habit.
Okay, so if I'm trying to, say, cut back on late night snacking, instead of keeping that bag of chips on the counter within arm's reach, I'd have to walk all the way to the grocery store at midnight.
Well, in a perfect world, yes. But realistically, even just putting those chips on a high shelf in a hard-to-reach container adds a layer of friction that might make you reconsider.
Right, it's like, is it really worth dragging out the stepladder for this?
Exactly. And often, that little bit of extra effort is all it takes to break the cycle.
It's about making that undesirable choice just a little bit less appealing, a little bit harder to do each and every time.
Precisely. And sometimes, that little bit of extra effort is all it takes to break the cycle.
I love it. It's like you're playing these little mind games with yourself, but in a good way, in a way that actually works.
Exactly. Because our brains are tricky, so we got to fight fire with fire.
I'm here for it. But beyond these like practical strategies, these hacks, Atomic Habits, also dives into this more nuanced aspect of habit change that I find really fascinating. It's the role of identity,
Yes. This is where it gets really interesting.
because it feels like so much of the self-help world focuses on goals and achievements, which are important, don't get me wrong, but identity, who we are at our core, that feels so much more powerful.
It is, and Atomic Habits highlights how your habits actually shape your identity and vice versa.
Like this feedback loop, right?
Exactly. Your actions reinforce who you believe you are, and your beliefs about yourself influence your actions.
So it's not just about wanting to lose 10 pounds. It's about asking yourself, what kind of person prioritizes their health and makes choices that reflect that?
Precisely. It's about embodying the traits and behaviors of the person you ultimately want to become, and then over time, those actions will reinforce that identity, making it easier to stick to those healthy habits.
It's like you become the sculptor of your own identity, right?
Yeah.
You're shaping it little by little with each choice you make.
Exactly, and it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy in a way.
Right. Because the more you act like that healthy person, the more you start to believe it.
Exactly. And Atomic Habits gives this great piece of advice. It says, think of a habit you'd like to build, right? What kind of person consistently does that habit? Now start acting like that person today, even if you don't fully feel like it yet.
Ooh, I like that. Fake it till you make it, but for habits.
Right. It's like stepping into a role, trying it on for size, and then over time, as you embody those actions consistently, the role starts to feel more and more like you.
It's like you're merging with that ideal version of yourself, one good habit at a time.
Precisely. It's about closing that gap between who you are and who you want to be, one small habit at a time.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground here, from the science of habit loops to those practical strategies for rewiring those loops, and even this fascinating dive into the role of identity.
Yeah, I think we've given our listeners a lot to chew on.
Definitely. But there's this one last idea from Atomic Habits that I just have to touch on, something that really resonated with me. It's what the author calls the Goldilocks rule.
Oh, yes, the Goldilocks rule. Such a great concept.
Right. For anyone who hasn't heard of this, it's the idea that humans, we thrive at the edge of our abilities, that sweet spot where things are challenging but not completely overwhelming.
Exactly, that Goldilocks zone.
Yes. And the book argues that the biggest threat to our success isn't actually failure, it's boredom.
Interesting, I can see that.
Yeah, it's like when things get too easy, too routine, we kind of check out, we lose interest, and that's when those old habits, those bad habits start to creep back in,
It's like we need that challenge to stay engaged, to stay motivated.
Exactly. So it's about finding that Goldilocks zone for ourselves, right? Constantly kind of calibrating, making sure we're pushing ourselves just enough to stay engaged, but not so much that we burn out or give up altogether.
And that applies to so much more than just habits, right? It's about finding that sweet spot in our work, our relationships, our personal growth.
Absolutely. So as you reflect on everything we've talked about today, in this deep dive, I have a little bit of a challenge for you, for all of our listeners.
Okay.
Where in your life are you playing it too safe? Where could you push yourself just a little bit further, step outside that comfort zone, embrace a little bit of that Goldilocks rule?
Yeah.
Because it might just be the key to unlocking a whole new level of growth and fulfillment. Thanks for diving deep with us today.